I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me back in 2019 that I've never spoken about publicly. I signed papers saying I wouldn't, and honestly, I wasn't sure I even wanted to remember it. But things have changed, and I think people deserve to know what's really out there in those mountains. I'm a veteran, did 2 tours overseas, came home, tried to settle into normal life, bought a small house, got a part-time job at a hardware store, lived on my military pension. It was quiet, boring even, but after everything I'd seen, boring felt good. I wasn't looking for adventure anymore. Then one Tuesday afternoon in October, my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. It was someone I'd served with, hadn't heard from him in probably 6 years. We did the usual catching up for a minute, but I could tell he was working up to something. Finally, he got to it. He asked if I needed money. The question caught me off guard. I told him I was doing okay, which was mostly true. My pension covered the basics, but the roof needed work, and I'd been putting off some dental stuff because of the cost. He said he had an opportunity, private contract work, maybe 5 days total, $15,000 in cash. No questions asked. I should have hung up right there. But $15,000 would solve a lot of problems. I asked what kind of work. He got vague, said it was security related, that they needed people with military experience, people who could handle themselves in rough terrain. Said I'd get a full briefing if I was interested, but I had to commit to at least hearing them out. Against my better judgment, I said yes. He told me to drive up to a small airfield in northern Washington, gave me an address and a date, 2 days from then. Said to pack for cold weather and mountains and to bring my rifle if I still had it. I did. Hadn't fired it in years, but I kept it maintained out of habit. The next 2 days I went back and forth on whether to go. Part of me knew this was sketchy. You don't get offered $15,000 for a week of work unless something's wrong with the job. But the other part of me, the part that was tired of barely getting by, kept thinking about that money, about finally fixing the roof, about not having to stress every time an unexpected bill showed up. I packed my truck on Thursday morning, cold weather gear, my rifle, ammunition, basic survival supplies. Told my neighbor I'd be gone for a week doing some work for an old army buddy. It was a 6-hour drive north through increasingly remote country. The farther I went, the more second thoughts I had. The airfield was exactly as remote as I'd feared. No tower, just a single runway and a few weathered hangars sitting in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. I pulled up around 3 in the afternoon and saw 5 other vehicles already there. Trucks and SUVs, all practical, nothing flashy. My old squad mate was waiting by one of the hangars. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, but he still had that same confident posture you never lose after the military. We shook hands and he thanked me for coming. Then he introduced me to the others, 7 men total, not counting me. All veterans, I could tell immediately. Something about the way they stood, the way they assessed me when we met. Ages ranged from probably mid-40s to early 60s. Nobody was using last names. We made small talk while we waited, but there was tension underneath it. Everyone was wondering the same thing. What the hell were we really doing here? Around 4 o'clock, we were led into one of the hangars. Inside was a large civilian helicopter being prepped by a pilot who barely acknowledged us. At the back of the hangar, someone had set up a makeshift briefing area with a fold-out table covered in topographical maps. A man in his 50s wearing expensive outdoor gear stepped forward. He introduced himself with a first name I've since forgotten and explained he was formerly military intelligence, now working private security and consulting. He said he represented clients who preferred to remain anonymous, people who had problems that couldn't be solved through official channels. Then he asked us a question I'll never forget. How many of you believe Bigfoot is real? I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. I looked at my squad mate, expecting him to crack a smile, but his face was dead serious. So were the others. The man running the briefing didn't seem offended by my reaction. He just waited for me to stop and then continued. He said Sasquatch are real, not folklore, not misidentified bears, real creatures. He described them as a remnant hominid species, highly intelligent, incredibly strong, perfectly adapted to deep wilderness. He said they avoid human contact, which is why verified sightings are so rare and why the scientific community refuses to acknowledge them. According to him, certain government agencies actively work to suppress evidence because they don't want the complications that would come with protecting an endangered intelligent species. I kept waiting for the punchline, but it never came. He pulled up photos on a laptop, blurry images of something large moving through trees taken by trail cameras and park rangers. Then he showed us something that killed any remaining doubt this was a joke. Crime scene photos. 3 dead hikers found in the Cascade Mountain Range over the past 8 months. The bodies had been torn apart. Massive wounds, signs of incredible strength. The official reports blame bear attacks, but he said the rangers who found them knew better. The wounds didn't match any known animal. The pattern of attack was too deliberate, too intelligent. 2 weeks earlier, a ranger had gotten close enough to see one of these creatures. He radioed in a description before fleeing, something 8 to 9 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown fur, walking upright. He said it watched him with human-like eyes before disappearing into the forest. The Park Service was terrified, but couldn't close the entire area without causing panic. They didn't have the training or firepower to deal with something like this. That's why they'd called in veterans, men who'd faced worse. The mission was straightforward: track the creature to its den, believed to be somewhere in a specific mountain valley, and eliminate the threat before more people died. This was completely off the books, no records, no official involvement. Each man would be paid $15,000 in cash, with a bonus if the job was completed successfully. We had 2 hours to decide. I stepped outside after the briefing. My head was spinning. This couldn't be real, but these men weren't joking. The crime scene photos were real. Something had killed those people. My squad mate joined me. He explained that the others had been briefed the previous day and given time to think it over. 2 other veterans had already declined and gone home. He admitted he'd seen things in the woods before, on hunting trips, things that didn't make sense. He believed the contractor. He believed this creature was real and dangerous. He asked me to trust him. We'd been through worse together. I thought about walking away, getting in my truck and driving home and pretending this conversation never happened. But something in my gut told me this was real. I'd always been good in the field, always trusted my instincts. And those instincts were telling me that whatever killed those hikers was still out there. I made the decision to stay. We geared up over the next hour. Rifles, ammunition, tactical vests, cold weather gear, first aid supplies. The helicopter pilot did his final checks, former military like the rest of us. 9 men total for the operation, 8 of us going in plus the pilot. The contractor stayed behind. He said he'd be waiting for our return. We lifted off in the late afternoon. The sun was already getting low in the October sky. Below us, endless forest stretched in every direction, mountains rising in the distance. The men were quiet, checking their weapons, lost in their own thoughts. I looked at each face and saw the same tension I felt. These were hardened men who'd seen combat, but there was something different about this mission. We weren't fighting an enemy we understood. We weren't fighting other men. The pilot announced we were approaching the coordinates. The area was incredibly remote. No roads, no trails, just virgin wilderness. Rangers had reported the last sighting near a series of caves at the base of a mountain. The plan was to land in a clearing about half a mile from the suspected den site. From there, we'd move on foot and search the area systematically. As we descended, I got my first real look at the terrain. Dense forest, rocky outcroppings, steep slopes covered in shadows. Perfect hiding place for something that didn't want to be found. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing. Before the rotors even stopped, 6 men jumped out and fanned into a defensive perimeter. My squad mate was leading them. He'd been designated team leader for the ground operation. A former Marine named Richards and I stayed with the helicopter as planned. Our job: secure the landing zone, protect the helicopter, provide cover if needed. The other 6 disappeared into the tree line, weapons ready, moving with practiced precision. My squad mate gave me a nod before he went. I returned it, hoping it wouldn't be the last time I saw him. The clearing was maybe 70 yards across, surrounded by thick pines and firs. The temperature was dropping fast as the sun sank lower. Everything was quiet except for the helicopter engine and the wind through the trees. Too quiet. I realized I wasn't hearing any birds, no small animals rustling in the undergrowth. Nothing. Richards noticed it too. We exchanged a glance but didn't say anything, just kept our positions and scanned the tree line. Radio chatter confirmed the team was moving deeper into the forest. About 20 minutes in, they reported finding tracks near a creek. Large footprints in soft ground, definitely not human or bear. They were following the trail. That uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. Richards tensed suddenly, raising his rifle and pointing at the northwest edge of the clearing. I followed his aim but saw nothing at first. Then I caught movement, something massive shifting behind the trees. For a moment we both froze, trying to confirm what we were seeing. Then it stepped into view. The creature was enormous, had to be 8.5 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark brown fur, matted and thick. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, arms hanging past its knees. The face was almost human, but not quite. Heavy brow, flat nose, jaw jutting forward. It was staring directly at us with dark, intelligent eyes. My blood went cold. My training kicked in, but my mind was screaming that this wasn't possible. This wasn't real. Richards fired first. The crack of the rifle echoed across the clearing. I saw the impact, fur and blood spraying from its chest. The creature flinched, stumbled back half a step. But it didn't go down, didn't even drop to its knees. I fired, aimed for center mass, hit it square in the shoulder. The creature's head snapped toward me and it roared, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Deep and guttural, but with an almost human quality that made it worse. The sound made my teeth hurt, vibrated in my chest, seemed to shake the air itself. But it wasn't retreating, it was adjusting its stance, lowering its center of gravity. Then it charged. We both fired again, multiple shots in rapid succession. I saw at least 2 more hits, dark blood matting the fur on its torso. The thing was moving impossibly fast for something that size, covering ground with a loping gait that reminded me of a gorilla, but faster, more fluid. Its massive arms swung with each stride, knuckles nearly brushing the ground. The pilot saw it coming. Through the cockpit window, his eyes went wide. He reached for the controls, hands moving on instinct. The turbine started whining higher, rotors beginning to speed up. He was trying to lift off, trying to get us airborne before that thing reached us. But there wasn't time. The creature was 40 yards away, 30. I was backing toward the helicopter, ejecting my spent magazine, fumbling for a fresh one. My hands were shaking. Richards was beside me, still firing controlled bursts. I could hear him counting his shots, maintaining discipline even as his voice shook. 20 yards. The pilot was screaming at us through the open door. Get in now. The helicopter was shuddering, trying to lift, the skids coming up a few inches off the ground. But the rotors needed more time to reach speed. More time we didn't have. 15 yards. I slammed the fresh magazine home, brought my rifle up, fired 3 rounds into the creature's chest. All hits. I saw the impacts, saw it stumble slightly, but it kept coming. Blood was streaming down its torso now, matting the fur, dripping onto the ground. This thing should have been dead, should have been on the ground bleeding out. 10 yards. Richard's rifle clicked empty. He was reaching for his sidearm when the creature suddenly juked left, a move so fast and agile it didn't seem possible for something that large. It went around us, not through us, heading directly for the helicopter. The pilot saw it coming. His hand slammed forward on the collective, trying to force altitude. The helicopter lurched upward, 6 feet off the ground, 8 feet. The creature leaped. I've never seen anything move like that. It covered the remaining distance in a single bound and caught the landing skid with one massive hand. The helicopter tilted violently to one side. The pilot fought the controls, turbines screaming. The creature's weight was dragging us back toward the ground. "Shoot it! Shoot it!" the pilot was screaming. But I couldn't get a clear shot without hitting the helicopter. Richards ran forward, trying to get an angle. The creature swung its free hand up, grabbed the skid with both hands now. Muscles bunched in its shoulders. It was trying to pull the helicopter down. The pilot was pulling back on the cyclic with both hands, fighting to break free. The helicopter was spinning now, rotating around the point where the creature held on. I got thrown to the side, lost my footing, hit the ground hard. Through the chaos, I saw the creature's face. It wasn't mindless rage. Its eyes were focused, calculating. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was trying to ground us, to bring us down to where it had the advantage. Richards got close enough and opened fire with his pistol, point-blank range, emptying the magazine into the creature's side and back. I saw the impacts, saw it flinch with each hit, but it didn't let go. Then the pilot grabbed the emergency axe from inside the cockpit, the kind meant for cutting through wreckage. He leaned out the door as far as he dared and swung it down hard onto the creature's hand, where it gripped the skid. The blade bit deep into flesh and bone. The creature roared, a sound of pain this time rather than aggression. It released the skid with that hand, and the helicopter immediately lurched upward, but it still held on with the other hand, and now it was angry. It swung its body, building momentum, then hurled itself upward. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was going to get inside the helicopter. One massive hand reached for the doorframe. Claws, actual claws I could see clearly now, extended toward the pilot. The pilot swung the axe again, hit the reaching arm. At the same moment, he threw the helicopter into a violent banking turn. The combined force broke the creature's grip. It fell, dropping 12 feet to the ground and landing in a crouch that should have broken bones, but it rolled with the impact and came up in a fighting stance. The helicopter climbed rapidly, putting distance between us and the creature. I was still on the ground, scrambling to my feet, rifle up. Richards was beside me, reloading his pistol with shaking hands. The creature stood there 20 yards away, bleeding from multiple wounds. One hand was mangled from the axe, dark blood streaming down its arm. But it was still standing, still watching us with those disturbingly intelligent eyes. We both fired again. More hits. The creature roared but didn't charge this time. Instead, it did something that froze my blood. It looked at the tree line, then back at us. Then it turned and ran, not in panic, not in pain, but with purpose. It crashed into the forest heading east, leaving a trail of blood and broken branches. And I realized where it was going. Toward the rest of our team, my hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the radio. I grabbed it, pressed the transmit button. My voice came out rough, strained. All units, we have contact. The creature is real. We engaged at the LZ. It's wounded but still mobile. Heading your direction. Multiple gunshot wounds, still extremely dangerous. I repeat, the target is heading towards your position. Static for several seconds that felt like hours. The helicopter had landed again, the pilot keeping the rotors spinning, ready for immediate takeoff. He was checking the damage to the skid, his hands shaking. Then my squad mate's voice came through, tense but controlled. Copy that. We see movement ahead. Multiple contacts, taking defensive positions. Multiple contacts. My stomach dropped. There was more than one. Richards and I looked at each other. We could hear the fear in each other's breathing, could see it in each other's eyes. Every part of my training said to get in that helicopter and leave. Extract now. Abort the mission. But our team was out there, our brothers. We have to go help them, Richards said. His voice was steady despite the fear. The pilot was shaking his head violently. Are you insane? That thing nearly brought us down. We need to leave, now. We're not leaving them, I said. It wasn't a debate. The pilot argued for another 30 seconds, listing all the ways this was suicide, how the helicopter was damaged from the creature's attack, how we should call for backup, how we were undermining the whole mission. But he could see in our faces that we weren't leaving. Finally, he cursed and said, fine. But if I hear that thing coming back, I'm taking off with or without you. I'm not dying in these mountains. Fair enough. Richards and I entered the forest where the creature had disappeared. The blood trail was obvious, dark splashes on leaves and tree bark, pools of it in depressions in the ground. Richards took point, moving tactically, rifle up and ready. I covered our rear. The trail was fresh. We could see where the creature had knocked aside branches, where its massive feet had torn up the undergrowth. But we could also see something else. There were other trails, older disturbances in the forest, paths through the undergrowth that weren't made by deer or other normal wildlife. Something large had moved through this area repeatedly, creating routes through the densest parts of the forest. We pushed forward as fast as we dared. The gunfire ahead intensified, no longer controlled bursts, but sustained fire, multiple weapons going full auto. Then we heard the roars, multiple voices, overlapping, coming from different directions. Deep, resonating sounds that made my chest tighten. My squad mate's voice on the radio, strained, barely audible over the cacophony of gunfire. Contact! Multiple hostiles. They're coordinating. We're surrounded. Then screaming, human screaming mixed with those inhuman roars. The sound of something massive hitting wood, trees cracking and breaking. A man's voice cut off mid-scream. We abandoned tactical movement and ran, crashing through undergrowth, jumping over fallen logs, sliding down a steep embankment. My lungs burned. My rifle felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but we kept moving. We burst into a small ravine and saw hell. 6 of our teammates were scattered across the rocky ground. The scene was carnage. 2 men were completely motionless, lying in positions that told me they weren't getting back up. The other 4 were clustered behind a large boulder, still firing into the tree line. But what froze me in place was what I saw in the forest around them. Massive shapes moving between the trees. I caught glimpses. Dark fur, impossible size, moving with a coordination that was almost military in nature. They were circling, attacking from different angles, using the terrain and trees for cover. This wasn't animal behavior. This was tactical thinking. One creature lunged from behind a dead tree, covering 20 feet in a single bound. It hit one of the standing men with the force of a car crash. The man went flying, his rifle spinning through the air. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. The creature was on him immediately. I could see it clearly now, covered in dark fur, maybe 9 feet tall, its hands massive and tipped with claws. It used those hands on the fallen man with terrible efficiency. I raised my rifle and fired, hitting it in the back. The creature's head whipped around and those eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought it would charge us. Every instinct screamed that I was about to die. But instead, it backed away from the man it had been attacking and melted into the forest. The other creatures pulled back too, their shapes disappearing between the trees. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, just the sound of men groaning in pain, labored breathing, and the wind through the trees. We rushed forward. Richards immediately went to the man who'd been thrown, checking for a pulse. I went to my squad mate, who was on his back, conscious but bleeding heavily. His tactical vest was shredded, deep gashes across his chest and arm. The wounds were massive, like he'd been hit with a machete. Jesus Christ, I breathed, pulling out my first aid kit. You should see the other guy, my squad mate tried to joke, but it came out as more of a gasp. Blood was bubbling at the corner of his mouth. I applied pressure to the worst wound on his chest. His blood was hot, soaking through the gauze almost immediately. Stay with me. You're going to be fine. Liar, he said, but he was smiling weakly. Another man was sitting with his back against the boulder, his leg twisted at a horrible angle. Bone was visible through his torn pants, white against the red of muscle and blood. He was in shock, staring at nothing, his lips moving silently. The man who'd been thrown last, the one the creature had attacked, was in the worst shape. His head was bleeding, a massive gash across his scalp. His arm was bent wrong, broken in at least 2 places. He was breathing but unconscious, probably a severe concussion or worse. One of the 2 who'd been down when we arrived was clearly dead. No point in checking. His injuries were too massive, too much blood loss. But the other one, an older veteran named Thompson, was still breathing. Barely. His chest was a mess of claw marks, his tactical vest literally torn apart like paper. Richards worked on him while I stabilized my squad mate. The other conscious man, the one with the broken leg, finally seemed to register our presence. They were waiting for us, he said, his voice distant, shocky. We walked right into their territory, and they were waiting. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep him talking, keep him present. The markings, he said. We saw them before the attack. Didn't understand what they meant until it was too late. I looked around the ravine. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see them. Deep gouges in the tree bark, starting about 7 feet up and going higher. Not random, deliberate, evenly spaced. Some trees had been stripped of bark in specific patterns, scratch marks that showed incredible strength, cutting through inches of wood. Territory markers like wolves or bears would make, but bigger, more deliberate. These weren't just scratches, these were warnings. There were tracks too, the man continued. His eyes were starting to focus a bit more, the immediate shock wearing off into a more lucid horror. Big ones. Multiple sets. We found a clearing about 100 yards that way. He gestured with his working arm. The ground was trampled flat. Prints everywhere, different sizes, adults and maybe juveniles. This is their home, this whole area. And we walked right into the middle of it. My squad mate was trying to sit up. I pushed him back down, gently but firmly. Don't move. You've lost a lot of blood. We found more than tracks, he said through gritted teeth. There were bones. Human bones, old kills, stripped clean, scattered around like a feeding site. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. We radioed it in, said we'd found evidence of victims. Then they hit us. Richards looked up from Thompson, his hands covered in blood. This one's bad. Real bad. I can slow the bleeding, but he needs a hospital now. I looked at the 5 wounded men scattered around the ravine. 2 of them couldn't move at all. 2 could maybe walk with support. 1 was unconscious and might not wake up. and we were half a mile from the helicopter through rough terrain, in territory controlled by multiple creatures that had just demonstrated they could coordinate ambush tactics. "We need to move them," I said. "All of them. We can't leave anyone behind." The man with the broken leg started laughing, a high-pitched sound that spoke of hysteria barely contained. "We're not making it out. You don't understand. These things, they're not animals. They're smart. They let some of us go when they could have killed all of us. They're sending a message." "What message?" Richards asked. The man's laughter died. His face went pale. "Get out. This is their territory. Get out and don't come back. Or next time, they don't let anyone leave." I looked at the scratch marks on the trees again, at the territory markers going up the trunks, at the deliberately spaced patterns that spoke of intelligence and intentionality. He was right. These creatures had ambushed a 6-man team of trained veterans. They'd coordinated their attack, struck from multiple angles, used the terrain to their advantage. But then they'd pulled back when they had the advantage, when they could have finished the job. They'd made their point. This was their home. We were the invaders, and now we had to get out before they decided to make that point more permanently. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "We do this tactical. We stabilize who we can, we move them in groups. Richards, you and I make the first run with the most critical. Can you two hold here?" I looked at my squad mate and the man with the broken leg. My squad mate nodded, even though I could see the pain in his eyes. "I can hold. Just hurry back." The man with the broken leg had a clear head now, shock receding. "Give me a rifle. I'll cover them." We fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and tactical vests for the unconscious man. Richards took the front, I took the back. Every step was agony. The weight, the terrain, the constant fear that those creatures were watching us from the trees. But we moved, slow and steady. The wounded man's breathing was shallow and irregular. I kept checking to make sure he was still alive. As we walked, I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd found. The bones, the territory markers, the coordinated attack, everything pointed to the same conclusion. These weren't just animals, they were a family group, maybe even a small tribe. They had established territory, hunting grounds, strategies for dealing with threats. They were smart enough to assess us as a danger, smart enough to send a message rather than just kill us all. And we'd walked into their home with rifles and the intention to hunt them down. Maybe we were the monsters in this story. The trip back felt endless. My shoulders burned from the weight. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those creatures following. But the forest was still, too still. We reached the helicopter and loaded the unconscious man aboard. The pilot started treating him immediately. Richards and I barely caught our breath before heading back. The return trip, both of us were already exhausted, moving as fast as we could, but it was getting darker. We were using flashlights now, making ourselves visible targets. But we had no choice, couldn't navigate this terrain in complete darkness. When we got back to the ravine, the 3 remaining conscious men were in worse shape. Adrenaline wearing off, pain setting in, shock starting to take hold. My squad mate could barely stay upright now. We decided to take Thompson and the man with the broken leg, the 2 who couldn't walk on their own. We helped the broken leg man onto Richard's back in a fireman's carry. I took Thompson on the makeshift stretcher, dragging it behind me. Again, the slow, painful journey back to the helicopter. Halfway there, we heard something in the forest parallel to us. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking, keeping pace. We couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond our flashlights, but we knew what was out there. We didn't stop. Couldn't stop, just kept moving. The thing in the forest followed us all the way to the clearing. As we emerged into the open, we caught a glimpse of it. Massive shape at the tree line, eyes reflecting our lights. Then it was gone, We loaded the 2 men into the helicopter, which was getting crowded. The pilot said we were at weight limit, maybe over it. But there were still 2 more men back there. We had to make one more trip. I was beyond exhausted, muscles screaming, lungs burning. But Richards and I went back one more time. We found my squad mate and the 4th wounded man, a guy named Patterson who'd taken a glancing blow that left his face badly gashed. We practically ran, half carrying both men between us. My squad mate was fading, lost a lot of blood, struggling to stay conscious. Patterson could barely see through the blood. We were almost to the clearing when we heard it. That roar again, close, too close. Behind us and to the left, multiple creatures moving through the forest. I pushed harder, supporting my squad mate, Richards helping Patterson. We broke into the clearing. The helicopter rotors were already spinning up. 50 yards to safety, 40, 30. Movement at the far end of the clearing, opposite from where we entered. Another creature, different from the first one. This one was bigger, lighter colored fur, almost gray in the fading light. It stepped fully into the clearing. Bold, unafraid, stood there watching us for a moment. Then it bent down and picked up a rock the size of a basketball. I realized what was about to happen and yelled a warning. The creature hurled the rock with terrifying accuracy. It flew across the clearing like a missile and slammed into the helicopter's tail section. Metal crumpled. Warning lights flashed in the cockpit. The pilot was screaming, trying to keep control. The creature picked up another rock, even bigger. Richards opened fire, hitting it multiple times. It staggered but didn't go down. It threw the second rock. This one hit the main rotor assembly. Something broke with a loud crack. The helicopter lurched, started to spin. The pilot fought it, managed to keep it mostly level. We dragged the last 2 men to the helicopter, shoving them aboard, climbing in ourselves. The creature was picking up another rock. The pilot didn't wait. He lifted off immediately despite the damage. The helicopter was shaking badly, controls sluggish. Warning alarms going off, hydraulic pressure dropping. That 3rd rock flew past us, missing by feet. We gained altitude, clearing the trees. The creature below watched us go, still standing in the clearing, not chasing, not hiding. Just standing there, like it was making a point, showing us who really controlled this forest. Then I saw movement at the tree line. 2 more creatures emerged, standing beside the first one. 3 of them watching the helicopter struggle away. We hadn't encountered one rogue creature. We'd stumbled into a family group. And these things were smart enough to coordinate, smart enough to use weapons. The helicopter was barely staying airborne. The pilot said we were losing fuel. Hydraulic fluid leaking, might not make it back to the airfield. He was radioing ahead, declaring an emergency, asking for medical to stand by. 9 men crammed in the helicopter, 5 of them wounded. I did what I could to keep pressure on wounds, keep them conscious. My squad mate was slipping in and out, mumbling about things in the trees. The unconscious man still hadn't woken up, pulse weak. Every minute felt like an hour. The helicopter shuddering with each gust of wind. We were flying low, following the terrain, couldn't risk going higher with the damage. Forest stretched endlessly below us, darkness settling over everything. I thought about those creatures, how easily they had ambushed our team. How they fought together, retreated strategically when faced with superior firepower, then came back with a different approach, used rocks as weapons. That wasn't animal behavior, that was combat tactics. 20 minutes from the airfield, we started losing altitude. The pilot said we weren't going to make it, had to put down. He found a logging road with enough clear space and brought us down hard. We hit rough. Everyone jolted, the wounded men crying out. But we were down. We were alive. The pilot immediately radioed our position, said we needed ground transport now. We waited in the darkness. helicopter engine ticking as it cooled. Every sound from the forest made us jump. Richards and I stood guard, rifles ready, both thinking the same thing. What if those creatures had followed us? 45 minutes later, headlights appeared down the logging road. 2 SUVs, the contractor and a medical team. They loaded the wounded into the vehicles. We left Richards behind to guard the helicopter until a recovery team could arrive. The contractor said nothing during the drive back. His face was grim. At the airfield, there was a full medical setup waiting. Doctors and nurses, all military trained, asking no questions. They worked on the wounded all night. I sat outside the hangar watching the sun come up. Couldn't sleep, kept seeing those creatures in my mind, kept hearing the screaming. My squad mate was in surgery. The doctor said he'd live, but it would be a long recovery. The unconscious man had woken up during the night, confused and in pain but alive. All 5 of the wounded would survive, though some would never be the same. One man would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Thompson lost 3 fingers on his left hand, but they were alive. 2 men didn't make it home. The one who'd been killed instantly in the initial ambush, and another who'd bled out before we could reach him. Their bodies were still out there in those mountains. The contractor said a recovery team would go in during daylight, but I doubted they'd find much. Those creatures had claimed their territory. They'd keep what was theirs. The contractor came out and sat down next to me. He asked what happened out there. I told him everything. Described the creatures, their size, their intelligence, how they worked together. The territory markers carved into the trees, the bones scattered around their feeding ground. How they'd let us live when they could have killed us all. He listened without interrupting, his face getting darker. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. This was worse than he thought. The Rangers had only ever reported seeing one creature. Nobody expected a family group. Nobody expected them to be that organized, that territorial, that deliberate in their tactics. He admitted they were unprepared, underestimated the threat. Should have sent more men, better equipment, should have done more reconnaissance first. Should have realized that creatures smart enough to avoid detection for centuries would be smart enough to defend their home. I asked what happens now. Do we go back with a bigger team, better weapons, air support? He shook his head. This operation was over. They were pulling out. The area would be quietly closed to hikers. Official reason would be bear activity and trail damage. The bodies of the dead hikers would be the last ones, at least for a while. Eventually, people would forget. The area would reopen, and maybe those creatures would move on to deeper wilderness. Or maybe more people would die. But that wasn't his problem anymore. His client wanted the threat eliminated. He failed. The contract was void. I was stunned. What about the creatures? What about justice for the 2 men we lost? What about protecting other hikers who might wander into that territory? He stood up, looked at me with tired eyes, said sometimes you don't win, sometimes you just survive, and sometimes the smart thing is to leave well enough alone. Those creatures have lived in those mountains for longer than we can imagine. They've learned to hide, learned to avoid us. We're the ones who went looking for them. We're the ones who invaded their home. Maybe the best thing we could do was respect the message they sent. Stay out. The contractor paid each man the full $15,000, even though the job wasn't completed. Extra bonus for the wounded, hazard pay for everyone. But there were conditions. We signed non-disclosure agreements, ironclad legal documents. We never speak about this to anyone. Not family, not friends, not authorities. What happened in those mountains stays buried. If anyone talks, legal action will be the least of their worries. The contractor made it clear. There are people who want these creatures to remain hidden. People with resources, with power, who don't want the world to know what's out there. People who understand that some secrets are safer kept than revealed. I signed without hesitation, wanted nothing more than to forget this ever happened. I took my money, said goodbye to my squad mate who was still recovering, promised to visit once he was home and healed, got in my truck and drove away from that airfield, swore I'd never go back to those mountains. The drive home was a blur. I ran on autopilot, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Irrational fear that something was following me. Got home late afternoon, told people the job was boring security work, nothing exciting, nobody pushed for details. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me reach for a weapon that wasn't there. I lay awake thinking about those creatures, about how close I came to dying, about my friends who were injured because we didn't understand what we were up against, about the 2 men who didn't make it home. I thought about all the stories over the years, all the sightings people reported, how everyone laughed, called them crazy. Now I knew the truth. Those people weren't crazy. And I knew why the government denies it, why certain groups work so hard to hide the evidence. Because if people knew the truth, they'd want something done about it. They'd want these creatures protected or studied or eliminated. And none of those options are simple. So it's easier to pretend they don't exist, easier to let the occasional hiker disappear and blame it on bears or getting lost, easier to maintain the comfortable lie than face the uncomfortable truth. That was 5 years ago. I still have nightmares about those 3 creatures standing in the clearing, watching the helicopter limp away into the darkness. Not chasing, not hiding, just watching, like they were making a choice to let us go. Like they knew we'd learned our lesson, stay out of our territory and we'll stay out of yours. I learned that lesson, learned it in blood and terror, and I never went back. None of us did. My squad mate recovered, though he still has scars across his chest and limited mobility in one arm. We talk sometimes, but we never discuss what happened. The non-disclosure agreement is still binding, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to talk about it even if it wasn't. Some memories are better left unspoken. I got my roof fixed with that money, got my dental work done, put some away for emergencies, but every time I spend any of it, I think about the price we paid. I think about those men lying in the ravine, bleeding. I think about how close we all came to never making it home. I think about the 2 who didn't. People ask me sometimes if I believe in Bigfoot, if I think those stories are real. I usually just shrug and change the subject. What am I supposed to say? That I was hired to hunt one? That I saw 3 of them with my own eyes? That they're real and they're smarter than we ever imagined? That they have territory and families and the ability to make tactical decisions? Nobody would believe me anyway. And maybe that's for the best. But I know the truth. I know what's out there in those deep forests. I know why experienced hikers sometimes disappear without a trace. I know why some areas have more bear attacks than others. And I know that there are things in this world that we're better off leaving alone. The official story is that nothing happened in those mountains in October 2019. No private military operation, no wounded veterans, no family of creatures using tools and tactics to defend their territory. Just another quiet month in the wilderness. And that's the way it's going to stay. But I'm telling you this now because I think people deserve to know. Not the specifics, I'll never give those. Not the location, not the names, not anything that could identify the people involved or lead someone back to that territory. But the truth that these things are real, that they exist, that they're not the mindless animals people imagine. They're intelligent, they're organized, they're dangerous when threatened, and they've learned how to stay hidden for a reason. They've survived for thousands of years by being smart, by being careful, by avoiding us as much as we've failed to find them. We went into their home with guns and the intent to kill. They defended themselves and their territory. They fought back with coordination and intelligence. And then they let us leave. They made a choice, one that probably saved all our lives. That's not animal behavior. That's something else entirely, something that deserves respect. even if it can't be acknowledged. So if you're ever hiking in remote wilderness and you get that feeling that you're being watched, that prickling on the back of your neck, that sense that something's wrong even though you can't see anything, trust that feeling. Turn around, go back. Don't investigate. Don't try to get a closer look. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Because some things are better left unseen, some territories are better left uncrossed, and some creatures are better left as myths. I learned that lesson the hard way. You don't have to. Those mountains are still out there. Those creatures are still living in them, hidden in the deep wilderness where humans rarely go. They're still marking their territory, still protecting their families, still surviving the way they have for millennia. And as long as we respect that invisible boundary, as long as we stay out of their home, they'll stay out of ours. That's the deal they offered us that day. That's the message they sent when they let us limp away in that damaged helicopter. For more interesting stories, check this out.